Got a real treat this afternoon. We're going to visit with Keith and Colton from Green Cover Seeds. We all have been getting a lot of questions lately. Of course, these guys are professional ag farmers that also help us food plot guys. So they've got a lot of knowledge. Hopefully we can save you some time and effort and make your food plots more successful. I wrote these guys and my objective for them was to help us solve some of the most common food plot mistakes. I've certainly had some failures and maybe you have too. Let's give them a listen and see what they share. Hey, good afternoon, Keith and Colton. Thanks for taking time to jump on this call with me today.
Yeah, good to see you, Grant. It's always a pleasure to join you.
You know, man, it's about time to be thinking about fall food plots. I know our trail cameras are showing some nice bucks out there. Where we're just talking off video. And is it here or is it, here, is it a fish story or, what we got going on? But we're seeing some nice bucks in our plots. All three of us have kind of sat down, hey, what's some of the most common questions, or I hate to use the word mistakes, but how could we redirect some people to maybe have more success with their food plots coming up? Let's just talk today through some of those things. I asked both Colton and Keith to chime in. And one of them we often get is seed depth. How about planting? And, all the way to broadcasting on top of the soil to a lot of people are using a no-till drill. Either they purchased one or rent one from the NRCS or a buddy or something. So let's go through seed depth and maybe what's one of the most common mistakes you all see when it comes to seed depth.
Well, I'll jump in on the first and then I can let Colton comment. But, probably one of the most common mistakes with the drill is going too deep. The temptation is to really get it socked down in there and really get some good soil over the top of it. And for the larger seeds, that works pretty well. But, in these mixes where we've got such a diversity of seeds, sometimes those smaller ones can struggle to come up, especially if you get a hard rain and you kind of get a little bit of a crust, a little bit of hardening over the top of that. And so, for most of these mixes, half to 3/4 of an inch is going to be sufficient most of the time. There is instances where you might want to go deeper, if you just got to go a little deeper to get the moisture to get it up and going. We've had guys do that, but probably more people get in trouble because they drill too deep rather than too shallow. Now, if you're drilling, and I can't stress this enough, you got to get off the drill and get back behind it and look. You can't just set it on what the drill says is 3/4 of an inch, because as you're riding up over thatch and duff and, you bounce over rocks and in Grant's area there, you're going to bounce over rocks. You should see some seed on top of the ground just from that bouncing and stuff, but you shouldn't see a lot. So if you're leaving too much on top, you may have to set it down a little deeper. If you're not seeing any at all, you might want to back it out just a little bit. So, Colton, what are you seeing guys do?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people look past kind of what soil type they're dealing with, whether it's on the clay side or if it's on the sandier side. That plays a big factor in how deep you're wanting to plant too, and how deep that drill likes to go. And then also the weight, the amount of seed that you're carrying on the back of that drill, that plays a big factor on how deep it can go too.
Yeah, and those planting conditions change. You may have to set it for one depth in the morning, and because of the conditions change, usually it dries out, it cuts so much better. You may have to adjust that. So, hey guys, if you're doing this, you're just like a farmer. Farmers need to get off. You need to look. You need to inspect that work. Don't just set it once and run all day and assume that everything is okay. Get off. You need to stretch your legs every now and again. Anyway, get off and just check, see where you're at on things.
I think those are great points, guys. I like to use a big, great big flat bladed screwdriver, and I literally ease it down the seed trench sideways and just turn it slowly and pry up real slowly. Because if you try to dig too fast, you throw those little seeds, which we're most concerned about when we're talking seed depth, and you won't see them. So I just get it in there and lift it up real slowly to find the depth of the small seeds. Those are probably the ones I'm most concerned with. And want to stress once again, get off that tractor and do it more frequently than not.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't need to get off the tractor because you're walking all the time. You're broadcasting seed. I use that technique a lot myself. What do you guys hear and see about broadcasting, or what's really important for folks to understand before they broadcast seed?
So the main thing I would say with broadcasting is you want to try and achieve seed to soil contact. That's just going to increase your odds of germination. I would say that the difference between broadcasting and drilling is it does take twice as much moisture to broadcast. So that's the only downside of it. So that's why we're implementing an increase of 50% of what our drilling seed rate is compared to our broadcasting seed rate. And then it just has to do with competition too. And if your competition's high out there, a lot of the times I'll have guys terminate or go out there and mow kind of that top layer off just so they can get seed to soil contact.
And if you've got, most guys, they may not have a drill, but they probably got an ATV. If you got just an old section of tine harrow or something, just try to get out there and scratch up that soil surface best you can before you broadcast. It gives some little places for the seed to fall down. Then after you do your broadcasting, just get an old bed spring or anything to just kind of go back and forth and smooth it back out. It just helps that seed settle down and get as close to the soil as possible.
Yeah, great tips, guys. One thing you talked about there that kind of had a thought for me, but you talked about terminating, Colton. I think it's important to remember that a little bitty old seed, when it first germinates, it's not very competitive. So like if you mowed your yard, it's going to grow back. Well, if you mow certain grasses or weeds in a food plot setting, they could grow back, and they have an established root system. So they might outcompete the seeds you're throwing out there because it's off to a pretty slow start. So just make sure you're giving your seed the best chance they can to not only germinate, but then thrive.
Mm-hmm.
I think tying into all this, we're talking about seed to soil, but sometimes you need to understand the soil type or conditions you have. It's not just one size fits all. What do you guys hear about that?
Well, there's a lot of variability when it comes to that, from clay to silt to sand. And a lot of that is going to affect the seeding conditions, like what Colton talked about. You may have to adjust your seeding depth, one versus the other. Sand typically infiltrates water really good. It doesn't store a lot. So if you got real sandy soils, you're not going to be as drought hardy as you will in a clay type soil. But a clay type soil won't absorb the moisture that you're going to have, with the sand. And so what's really important is that you build organic matter, because that helps all of the soil. So clay with organic matter is way better than just clay. Sand with organic matter is way better than just sand. And so it doesn't matter where you start, you can always get better. And the best thing that you can do is be continually adding carbon, much like what you've shown, Grant. I mean, you didn't even hardly start with soil at all. You started with a bunch of rocks, but it can be grown. People think that it takes 1,000 years to make an inch of topsoil because that's what we were taught in school. And that's true if the only thing that's working out there is the weathering process on rocks. But we've got all these biological tools at our disposal, plants and bacteria and fungi. We can do it a whole lot faster than that.
Yeah, I think using the release system or regenerative ag has just been shown now literally hundreds or thousands of times to improve all these soil types. And a really good soil is more forgiving. It's not only more productive, it's more forgiving for those of us that are trying to grow a crop, oftentimes in less than ideal conditions in a food plot setting.
And even to the point of pH, some people have pretty low pHs, some have pretty high, but the more carbon you have in the soil, the less that matters, because that carbon will buffer the pH right around the root growing zone. So you can grow some, and we've, our pHs here are typically pretty low. We've had a lot of low 5s, but you can grow some pretty good crops if you've got enough carbon in your soil to kind of help buffer that right where it counts.
That's a great point. I get questions all the time. Just had a question from our friend George about adding lime and trying to go back and address that. Boy, your soils are coming around. I think you can maybe avoid that expense and soil compaction and time just by a rotation or so of doing this good blend. Sometimes I hear that, boy, my crop just didn't grow. And it's pretty rare for this really dire conditions that seeds don't germinate and grow. What's some of the things that could be maybe impacting those observations folks have? And what's a good way that they could easily check, or, what kind of a tool they could use to determine how their crop's doing?
One way we were talking about is a utilization cage. or a tomato cage. That's a great way to show if you have heavy browse in your food plots or not. A lot of the guys talk to me and say, hey, I don't think it's growing. And a lot of the times I just tell them just to check their camera, and there's actually a whole lot of deer in there just feeding out and just over browsing most of their species that they have out there.
Colton, I think the utilization cages are a great tool, because even myself, sometimes you go off to work somewhere a week or two and you come back, oh, boy, I thought that food plot should have grown a bit more, but I do use utilization cages. So again, hop off the truck, out of tractor, whatever, and go check out that utilization cage. And, when it's it's throwing out numbers from time of year, but a foot tall inside and lip high, what we call lip high, kind of browse to the ground outside. It wasn't your planting technique or lack of rain or seed or something. It was just so many mouths. It may be important to share with people that deer consume, on average, about 5% of their body weight a day. So 100-pound doe, that's 5 pounds a day. And even that's a little misleading, because they're going to salivate and urinate or respirate out all that moisture, or almost all of it. So it takes about 15 to 17 pounds of plant material out in the field to really equal 5 pounds of dry weight. So you have, handful of nannies and fawns coming into a small food plot every afternoon on your camera, and you're getting all excited and thinking about bow season. All of a sudden your food plot looks pretty bald. Well, guys, when the food plot's young, a couple inches tall, and you got several deer removing 17 pounds a day, it can get gone pretty quick.
Yeah, and what other tool is going to cost you $10 worth of materials at the hardware store, and you can use it every year? I mean, it's super simple to make, to utilize. You can reuse it. It should just be part of everybody's program, so you can really get a good indication of what's going on out there.
Just a chicken wire or whatever, just a little wire. I'll tell one funny while we're on this. One time I was on a very high dollar research project at a massive research lab, and they had some food plots, and they got a hold of me and said, gosh, Grant, our food plots are actually shorter inside the cages than outside. And I'm like, how could that possibly be? Do you have a roof on there that's limiting rain getting down or something? Well, they'd use a particular type of wire that had this coating that was coming off, and it was a toxin to the plants. I'd never seen it before, but it was only time I've ever seen in my life where inside the cage was actually shorter than outside the cage. So just use regular hog wire, any kind of web wire. If you got some old chain link fence that you didn't use, that would work, anything like that. It could be something else though, right? We have army worms in a lot of places throughout America, kind of every fall or other times of year, and other insects going through. There's a lot of reasons. Or if you're taking over, I've had this before with some folks, you're taking over a crop field. Maybe the farmer said, hey, you can use that back corner. Deer tend to eat up my crops there, so why don't you just make a food plot back there? And you plant your seed and nothing grows. I bet Keith's already saying, and Colton, what's going on, but that farmer may have used some herbicides or a cocktail of herbicides that he was thinking about planting a specific crop. And you're planting a blend of species, and some of the species may react with those herbicides in the soil, and it prohibit those seeds from, germinating. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons.
Certainly we see some herbicide injury from time to time. Now, as you get into the system and you're not having to use herbicides with a lot of residuals, then that's helpful. And just because you're in this type of system, it doesn't mean you can't use any herbicides. You just have to know what you're using, know what the residual effects are, and then plant your next crop accordingly. Again, it's just like farming. That's what farmers do all the time for that. One other thing that we see that could be a possibility, particularly, Grant, I know you and potentially a lot of the listeners are in a pretty bad drought right now. We will sometimes see that you plant the seed, whether you're broadcasting or you plant it, you get enough of a rain to sprout it, but then there's no moisture underneath there. We've seen whole fields sprout and then die. And yes. So that is a possibility too. So, and I know a lot of listeners aren't able to be right there at their plots all the time, but if you planted it, it came up, or you go back a month later and there's nothing there, it could have sprouted and then died. That is not uncommon for areas that are experiencing drought.
Which is just another great reason to use that simple utilization cage, because that would, if it's, again, lip high outside and inside the cage, there's an issue besides deer browsing and everything. It's likely drought. Drought's a real common one. Yeah.
I like to have a camera on my plots year round just to see kind of what's going on out there, even especially for out of state landowners. I think it's a very great tool just to have out there to see what's going on, see what they're eating on, and see kind of their movements early season.
I think sometimes this whole, because it's a system or process, right? And sometimes I get guilty just looking at one season. But we really need to be planning for the future crop, right? Because what we're doing now will impact future crops. Maybe you guys could address that a little bit.
Yeah, again, most of my work is with farmers, so that's what I compare it to. But I see very little differences here, really, because both the food plotter and the farmer are looking at building the system. And you can't build a system if you're only planting in that one little window a year where it's typically getting hammered down pretty hard with the deer. So, in this release system, in the release process, you have a great opportunity to utilize the longest days of the year, the days, right now that have the most solar energy coming. And you let plants turn that solar energy through photosynthesis, let them turn it into chemical energy and pull carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil, because it's building soil during that season that really helps those fall plots really take off and go. And that's what not only builds your soil, but it is building that nutritional profile for that next set of plants, which really helps. And I think it makes a big difference too, where you're at. If you're in an area with a lot of ag land, everybody and their dog has corn and beans and alfalfa and everything else. Well, then your summer plots may not be as critical for the deer, but they're still really critical for your soil. And actually, that's a big advantage for you. Because when Grant, I know you get this all the time, people can't get their summer plots to establish because deer are just hammer them all the time. Well, don't feel bad if your deer are out browsing your farmer neighbor's soybean field and letting your plots grow, because that's how you're building your soil for those fall plots.
Yeah, I learned long ago that it's much less expensive and actually is time savings also to have a good summer crop, even if that's not my primary mission, than to, buy the herbicide to control the weeds and more fertilizer and everything I need that summer crop could have performed for me, in addition to feeding some deer and getting deer conditioned to feeding in my food plot. I don't want them to find that food plot opening day of bow season. That's just not going to happen. I want them to be on a pattern of feeding there. That's a big advantage for me. And I'll just throw out there, some people, oh my gosh, I got all these does out there in my food plot. I've been blessed to put a lot of GPS collars on deer throughout my career and work with other scientists that have put many more on deer than I have. I'll just be really honest. I've never seen one situation where a buck had a range and there's no does in it. It just doesn't work that way. Biology, they may bed a little separate or, separate out during the rut, but I just haven't come across any area where bucks and does were like that all summer. Those GPS collars are kind of going in the same circles out there somewhere. So deer eating your food plots, that's what we plant them for.
That's right. And one other thing about the summer food plots, the reason that we include a decent little amount of the grain sorghum, the milo, is so that, we know the deer aren't going to preferentially browse on that throughout the year. That allows it to put a grain head on. You roll through that either with your roller crimper or you smash it down with your drill. And then I know I've seen pictures that you've sent, Grant, of those deer are out there eating those grain heads and later in the year as well. So you're actually providing some fall nutrition with your summer plots with that particular species.
I think a lot of stuff we've talked about kind of defines a little bit about how we go about making blends. Some people just, put some clover in a bag and that's product A, or some wheat in a bag and that's product B. We do blends primarily. And if you're in an area that has a really heavy browse pressure, like some of my plots, well, years ago, we recognized that you're going to need more seeds per acre to compensate for that browse pressure, because any level of planting, if the crop matured to 3/4 mature, would probably be enough forage out there. The problem is getting it to that stage. Maybe Colton or Keith, you could address that and why we have different blends for those different type of basically deer populations, deer densities.
Yeah, with this blend, I would say we're putting diversity out there. One, it's not only good for the soil, but we're also having the wildlife and the deer eat the most tastiest plants first. They're going to go after, for example, in our summer release, we see them always hit the buckwheat and the mung beans typically first, and why they're allowing the other stuff to kind of grow up. And then once that becomes palatable, then they're going to move on to that, and then give those first species a chance to kind of grow up and get some height on them.
Yeah. And Grant, working with you, it's been good for me to learn because, I know the cropping side of things and I know the cattle side of things, but, learning some of the deer stuff has been really interesting to me. And, and so as we've kind of learned together, we've tweaked these blends. And so we have kind of the standard, and then we have that browse pressure, the really heavy one. And a lot of times they're very similar components, but they're at different rates. There are different ratios based on what we think we need in order to have plants out there, not only to build the soil, but to have some survival for later browsing and forage as well.
Yeah, it's fun learning and playing with these. And the huge advantage I've had is with green cover, guys, y'all are stocking 100+ varieties of seeds. I'm not limited to, 2 types of clover and 1 cereal grain and a turnip or something. I've got 100+ cover crop species, many of which are important deer browse species. And y'all are just purchases in some volume because you're a big ag company, and you've allowed me to play on the wildlife side a little bit with y'all, partner with y'all on that. And that's just a huge advantage from a wildlife biologist point of view.
Yeah, it is. There's no doubt that, purchasing in volume like that, and a lot of it, we're working directly with the growers. So we're not even buying it through a broker. We've got these acres contracted with the growers. And then that way we have almost total control over the quality, over the timing. We're doing a lot of the cleaning of this ourselves. And so it just gives us a lot better handle, both on the production costs, but as well as the timing and the quality also.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll share there, Keith, that also that big inventory you have allows me to experiment, not only here, but some of my friends' properties throughout the Whitetails range, and try, blends and varieties before they ever even think about becoming a product or something we put in a bag, and that we can learn and or fail before someone else has to learn and fail.
Well, you call it the proving grounds for a reason, and that's one of the reasons.
Well, this has helped me, and I'll bet it's helped a lot of our viewers. I want to thank you both for taking time out of your day to come on here and share your information. And Keith and Colton also have some test plots of their own proving grounds. Gosh, how many varieties you guys got out there, roughly?
Yeah, well, here at our plots at Bladen, we've got about 100 different monoculture plots. That means one thing planted in a plot. And we do that just so we can see what its growth habits are, see how it works. And then we've got about a dozen different mixes growing out there, including a number of the summer growing deer mixes. And then we're doing some really interesting things with interseeding into corn. So we've got field corn planted, and we're planting cover crops in between to see how that works, just looking at different timing things. So we would love any of the growing deer folks, if you're interested in coming up. We're going to have a field day August 1st and then also August 4th. It's the same thing both days, so you can come either one day or the other and spend the morning with us. We'll be touring through all that, explaining it, and giving in-depth descriptions about what all the different cover crops do. Just go to our website, GrowingDeer.tv. There's information on there how to get registered. It's free. Doesn't cost you anything to come. We'll serve you a great meal, and we'd love to have you come.
Man, I hope I get to make it up there, actually. Hey, for those of us that can't make it, maybe y'all could take some pictures or video or something, and we can hop back on here in a few weeks or something and share the results of this big project you have going on.
Yeah, we sure can. And, we just sent an email out, I think, yesterday, and just observations from the plots. Number one observation, again, this year, is how good the mixes are at suppressing weeds. We've spent a lot of time pulling weeds out of the plots where it's just one thing growing. I tell you what, the crew has spent almost no time pulling weeds out of those mixes. They just, the diversity just allows nature to have what she wants, and that's to have a multitude of plants. That's how God created plants, to grow in community. And so if you're only putting one thing out there, there's going to be other things that want to come in.
That's great information. I want to thank you both again for sharing your expertise and time. I encourage everyone that can get to that field day. I've been up there at Keith's facility a couple of times, and man, it's an awesome chance to learn and take that in. So with that, I want to remind everyone that while we're learning about soil and seeds, that's a great way to learn about creation and the Creator and His promises to us. And I hope that everyone listening will take time daily to be quiet and seek the Creator's will for their life. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.